Welcome to my first episode of the Higher Alignment podcast. It has been a long time coming. I wanted to do this for a while. I'm just super happy and grateful to be here. And I wanted to start with just sharing a bit about my story in hopes that you can relate to it and maybe see parts of yourself along the journey. And hopefully, it inspires you to maybe shift some perspectives or try something different in your life. So, I like to say that I am a recovering perfectionist and control freak. um, for as long as I can remember, I have always dealt with, or used to always deal with anxiety, overthinking, over control, overachieving, lots of overs. and, you know, I really always felt like it was never enough. And I would say that that attitude got me a lot of places in life. Like from the outside in, I had a great life, really. And I do feel very grateful for all the things I had in my life, but that doesn't make up for the fact that inside I still never felt like it was enough. And so I lived a life where I was constantly chasing the next thing, constantly looking for things outside of me to make me feel whole and complete. And of course, we know that's a never ending chase. That's a race you'll never stop running. So I had to really shift my perspective, shift how I was living, shift how I was showing up, and really like what I learned along the way is I was always trying to do more to fill that void. And what I learned was that I really had to let go of a lot of things in order to fill that void. So, I from a little kid, I always dealt with sleep issues. Never really had great sleeps. My mother also didn't sleep well. And if I'm being honest, I think I got some of my anxiety from that place. I was very attached to her. I loved her dearly. I remember as a kid, um, she'd come home from work. She was self employed. Her and my dad both were. And in the middle of the day, she'd come home to have lunch with me, which I loved. And then she'd be like, "Hey, well, you have to have a nap." And so I'd be like, "Okay, well, you have to lay down with me." So she'd lay on the couch with me and I'd fall asleep. And then when I wake up, she'd be gone. And I remember being so upset. And I'd run to the phone, his landline, and call her. Luckily, because she was self employed, I could call her 20 times a day, which I'm pretty sure I did. But where are you, mom? Why did you leave me? And of course, she had to go back to work. Um, but I did feel very anxious and like I was always missing her. And that's kind of carried in throughout my life. It's been a common theme. Um, but I was always very conscious of that. And again, never really felt like I was enough or just never felt like there was no shortage of things to do or things to achieve, I guess. And I'm going to be honest, stereotypical Asian household. like, my parents came from Vietnam in 1979 on a boat. They paid their way to get out of the country. My dad's family was actually one of the richest families in the province they lived in Vietnam, and my mom was very poor. And my dad's family was very kind and loving, and they really embraced my mom and took care of her and my oldest brother. And when the communists took over, it was my grandma on my dad's side that was really a proponent of like, you guys need to leave, because they were taking all their stuff, and they really wanted them to escape. So they paid their way to get out. First time they left, they actually they were blackmailed essentially. So they paid and then they threw them in jail. My parents, my oldest brother, were both in jail for a while. Then they paid to escape again. Then that's when they had success and they made their way to Canada. But knowing that story, knowing that your parents literally put their life on their line, the life on the line to come to another country for freedom, it really puts everything into perspective. Like the things we deal with on a day to day are nothing in comparison to coming over on a boat and not knowing if you're going to even survive the journey. And so I think in probably lots of immigrant households, but I obviously can relate to the Asian one. There's this aspect of like, we just make things happen and we don't complain and we don't air our business outside of the household, and we just put our heads down and work. And I'm really grateful for that being instilled in me, truthfully, because if there's one thing I know about me is I'm not scared of hard work, and I know that if I just apply myself, I can find my way through it, right? So the other side of that, though, is that you're not really taught to pay attention to your needs and how you feel inside. You're really just taught to get things done and to push through. And I think that's probably not obviously just an Asian household. Lots of my clients deal with the same thing as well too. And what I've learned along the way is when that is your survival mode strategy, is to just neglect what you need internally just to make the outside world seem to keep the outside world continuous and flowing, and to keep that train running. When that is your survival strategy, eventually that'll catch up to you. And I think that's what a lot of people are realizing these days, especially after what we've been through the last 4 years. That was a time when we were kind of forced to sit still and forced to be with ourselves in some capacity. I think everyone was inevitably changed from that time because they had to look within. Now, not everyone did something about it, though. Lots of us looked within, maybe didn't like what we saw, and just kind of kept with the same patterns after the fact. And some of us did take time to really sit with it and make the adjustments. But regardless, I think now you can't deny that everyone's in a state of, not everyone, but the majority of people are in a state of disconnect with themselves. And that's what I think leads to burnout. Burnout, the root cause of burnout is being disconnected within. So many of us think that it's because we have too much stuff on our plate. And that might be it. But too much stuff on your plate isn't the reason for the burnout. It's the misalignment to those things that is draining your energy resources. And that's why I'm so passionate about this. But, bringing it back to how I grew up is I wasn't connected with myself because that's not really something I was taught. I was taught to get good grades, keep a clean household, keep a clean room, work hard. I was also a competitive dancer all my life. So, I learned again and I also started working for my parents like early, like because I was just wanted to be with them all the time. But like I was answering the phones at my mom's business. She was a seamstress. Probably around 5 years old, she started to teach me how to answer the phones. And then I was working at my dad's gas station at 12, standing on a stool, selling everything. You name it, from chocolate bars, paying for gas, selling cigarettes. I didn't know how to read an ID properly. Like, I remember like someone would hand me an ID, and this is like, thank God this is not, I guess this isn't legal, whatever. Anyways, the business is gone. But I would get an ID to check if someone was of age, and I would get confused between the expiry date, the issue date, and the date of birth. And so I'd look and I'd panic. I'd be like, yeah, sure, what do you want? And then 12-year-old selling cigarettes. Anyways, so again, taught to work hard, taught all these really incredible skills at a very young age, but again, didn't really know Mintu per se, and I would say I had a really great life as a kid too. I had loving parents. My parents were married right up, obviously, until my dad passed earlier this year. I have two older brothers who are great brothers, both in healthy, loving relationships, beautiful kids. Again, have shown me the epitome of hard work, being a good man, taking care of your family, like really, really great things. And one thing I can say about my family is, my brothers are quite a bit older than me. So were we ever like the closest? No. But did we always have mutual respect for each other and the lives we were living? Yes. Like that was undoubtable. And whenever there was something that came up that we needed to come together as a family on, we we could rely on each other, which is something I'm really grateful for. Um, and so yeah, that was my childhood. Hard work. We grew up in a small town called Wainwright. Some of you may know of it, some of you may not. It's 5,000 people. But, growing up in a town like that, everyone knew each other. You couldn't really do something without your parents finding out. But it was a great experience because there was a sense of being able just to be free. And of course, at that time, we didn't have the internet like we do now. We didn't have phones like that. So there's this element of being able to be present, which was great. However, again, I didn't really know how to pay attention to my needs, and because that just wasn't part of my survival strategy growing up. That's not really what was instilled in me. And, as I'm talking about it out loud right now, it's my parents came here to survive. And in turn, looking back on it, I think they were able to thrive more than they would have been in their situation back home. I guess we don't really know, but this was what they decided they needed to do for themselves and their family. But it came out of survival mode. So, you think that that was the mentality they had coming here. And no doubt that's what they would have put in us as children, too. Like, we need to survive. And probably the idea of thriving or going beyond survival really wasn't necessarily in their wheelhouse, and that's not to any fault. They did what they could, and they did the best with what they had, and I'm so grateful for all their teachings. But as an adult now, I can process how survival doesn't necessarily put us in a place to grow and expand and really reach our true potential. It's just enough to keep us going, and so again, I go back to the fact that I really had a hard time sleeping at night, all throughout high school, all throughout my early adulthood. In my adulthood, once probably once I was like 19, 18, I started having digestion issues pretty bad. And I used to think it was like the stomach flu a couple times a year because I would be vomiting, and it was not bulimia. Okay. I know it sounds like it could have been an eating disorder, but that was not it. It was my stomach would get so activated that I just couldn't keep food down. And actually, it's not that I couldn't keep food down. The pain just got so severe that the only way that I felt like I could relieve it was to make myself vomit. So I did that often. And I remember, again, in 19, 20, it would happen a few times a year, and I got through it. And then beyond that, it started to get worse. And I really didn't get a hold of it until a few years ago when I really started to manage my stress properly. And because it was all stress related, like hands down. And the body is so intelligent, and it's constantly speaking to us. And, I talk about with burnout how, again, it's a disconnect. It's an indicator that something within us is not in alignment, or that there might be multiple things out of alignment. And the body is constantly speaking to us in different ways, showing this to us. But again, if we're not taught to listen to ourselves and listen to our needs and pay attention to these warning signs, we often neglect them. So for me, the way my body was telling me was that I needed to fix something was digestion issues, poor sleep, needing to be in control all the time, overthinking, and overachieving, because those were the things I did. The overachieving was what I did as a kid to essentially feel like I was keeping my keep, like holding up my end of the bargain in my household. So um, once I got into adulthood, I went to school. I started in sciences just because I finished with like a 98% average in like chem and physics in high school. And so I thought that meant I needed to go into sciences. Boy, was I wrong. And not that like I love learning about this stuff now. Like, I love understanding how the body works and the nervous system. It's like I'm fascinated by these things. But at that time, what I didn't know was, of course, when you go into sciences, you're on a bell curve. So it doesn't matter how smart you are. It depends how smart the rest of your class is. Okay? And I was going to school with people who wanted to be doctors and pharmacists and optometrists. I didn't want to be any of that. I just knew I was good at sciences, and so I went into it. So about a year in, I realized this was not for me. I switched into a business major or a business degree with an accounting major, which definitely made more sense. But honestly, I didn't like school. And not that I don't love learning. I'm obsessed with learning. I like that's all I do these days, but I didn't like university. And so I didn't finish. And I'm sure you can imagine the excitement, not non-excitement, on my that my parents had, knowing that their youngest did not want to finish. My older two brothers did. They both had great careers, and I did not want to. And so that was another version of just kind of feeling like I was a disappointment because I wasn't following what they wanted me to do. But I chose to start working instead and ended up, I worked for an insurance company for a few years, kind of climbed my way up to that, then jumped around a little bit. And then I found my way into my last career, which was working in the luxury retail world for one of the biggest luxury brands in the world. And I spent 9 years there. And at that job is where I really started, I would say, to hit the peak of my burnout and hit the peak of living my life based on the expectations everyone else had around me. I couldn't identify it at that time, but I can now in hindsight. So that was the peak of that. I was working for Mercedes Benz, and I started in a sales position, had no experience, one of very few women in that industry, period, and in that store. And I climbed my way into a management position within just a couple years. Um, and I was living, I would say, the epitome of the dream, quote unquote. I was 20 something years old. I was making six figures, grew to multiple six figures. That was once I got into my 30s. I was working in a beautiful store with Mercedes everywhere around me. I was driving a Mercedes. I had all the things. And, you know, I I would say from the outside looking in, again, I had a great life. I had a great family. I have amazing friends. I had this great job. I was still young. I was climbing to the top. Had lots of energy still in me, lots of runway ahead of me. But I couldn't ignore the fact that I wasn't happy. And I dreaded my days. Like, I would go to sleep at the end of the night just exhausted and needing to sleep. Like, sleep was coming from a desperate point. And what made it hard was I didn't have good sleeps because my anxiety would take over and my nervous system would be overrun. And I'd wake up throughout the night worried about, like, did I finish that contract properly? Did I submit this to the bank properly? This client needs to come in. I need to get back to them. Like, I would often wake up in the middle of the night and have to put notes in my phone to make sure I did what I needed to do so I wouldn't lose my job or I wouldn't lose my performance aspect or what I was good at. And then I'd wake up the next day, terrible sleep, and I'd have to go through it all again. And I would dread it. And it was not short hours there. I'd be there, 8, 9, sometimes 10 hours a day. And it was a grind. But I'll be honest, I was there because I had golden handcuffs on. I was making this great money. It afforded me this great lifestyle, and I worked with great people. I do want to say that I did work with really great people who I still friends with to this day. But as I, alluded to earlier, it's like when you're looking for outside resources to fill a hole within you, it's not lasting and it doesn't actually work. It's just a band-aid. And so, about 6, 7 years into my career, I was so burnt out. And I think what hit me the most is the fact that I felt guilty about it. Like, again, this great life, and why do I want to escape it? Like, I lived for vacation. Like, and because I was, I had the means, I was taking as many as I could. And the thing is, I couldn't get away from the store very often. But even if I had 3 days, I was on a plane. I was like, where can I go? Because I wanted to escape my reality so badly. And it didn't quite make sense. Like, again, all these great things, but why do you want to get away so bad, Mintu? Like, where is this coming from? And that guilt was so heavy because I saw lots of people who didn't necessarily have the same life that I did. And they honestly seemed happier, some of them, and they seemed more at peace with themselves. And I just couldn't get to the bottom of why I felt so guilty for wanting to escape my own life. And so when I had the epiphany that I was looking forward to vacation more than I did my everyday life, I know that sounds like a pretty normal thing, but it is really messed up when you think about it. Like, I had to escape. I was like, something needs to change because I don't even know what the next step looks like, but I know I can't keep living this way. And so this is when I started to do some deep work on myself. And I just started to look into things like mindfulness and meditation. And I started there, and that was hard in the beginning because, like, I'm a recovering fight or flight stress response. I didn't say that very well, but like I exist in fight or flight. I existed, not currently, but I used to be in fight or flight like 90% of my life. Like, not even just the day, even at night, my nervous system wouldn't shut down. And so starting with meditation was great, but it was challenging because laying still felt like death to me. It felt like my life was going to end if I just laid still for too long. But I started there, and I started reading books, and I started going honestly on a spiritual awakening, is what I call it. I just started to get in tune to what was really going on with me and started to pay attention to the parts that I had been ignoring for so long. Now, here's the messed up part of it. And I don't know if anyone can relate, but like, I was so good at hiding from myself the fact of how upset I was with my life, or like the insecurities I felt inside. I was so good at hiding that from myself. Like, if you would have asked me, Mintu, do you have any insecurities? Mintu, do you question your worth? I'd be like, no, what are you talking about? Like, look at all these things I've accomplished and done. And like, since a kid, as a competitive dancer, I used to win. I've always had these accomplishments to kind of justify my quote unquote worth, or justify the love I had for myself. But if I really felt that way, why would I still be questioning my everyday life if I really felt like worthy and loved? But I was so good at hiding it from myself. Like, I had my partner asked me when we first started dating, he said, if you had to go back and tell your 20-year-old something self, what would you say? And I said, well, I'd tell her to love herself more. I said, but she'd respond to me, I do love myself. What are you talking about? Like, I just had myself fooled. I had everyone else fooled and I had myself fooled, thinking that I had it all together. But again, when I started to kind of go through this spiritual awakening and just look at the fact that, like, Mintu, something's missing here. And while you are performing at a high level on all these things, like, what is the foundation of all that if deep down inside you're not feeling like you're enough, or you're not feeling like this life is enough? Like, how strong are those towers and buildings that you've built if technically they could all crash because there's actually nothing substantial supporting it underneath, you know? And so I started to deep dive into myself. And honestly, since that time, my number one project has become me. Instead of putting all my energy into my career and all my energy into my relationships and having the things and diversifying my portfolio and buying properties, all this stuff, like, I switched my focus into like, well, where's the foundation of all this? Because the foundation comes from within. The foundation doesn't come from the exterior. what we manifest into our life is a result of the frequency that we're embodying. Now, where that gets tricky is we can think we have those things based on the outside, what has shown up on the exterior, but whether those things are lasting, whether the relationship to those things are lasting is going to come to the surface based on what's actually within you. And so, like, I'll be honest, the main place I realized that I was having that there was this disconnect was how I was feeling every day, but then also my intimate relationships. That is one area that I just would constantly find myself in this cycle of trying to prove my worth. And then, but I also saw that playing out in the fact of the things I was accomplishing. Again, trying to prove my worth with my income and my job and my vehicle, my house, and just all the things, the looks, the makeup, just everything, my nails. I do miss my nails, but I had to get rid of them. But like all these things, it's not bad to have those things. I do want to say that it's not bad to want a nice home and a nice vehicle and make yourself feel good how you look. But where is that coming from? Is that coming from a sense of you thinking that once you have those things, it's going to make you feel a certain way? Or are those coming from a place of you just embodying the true love and freedom that you are, and therefore attracting them into your life? It's very subtle, but it makes all the difference. Because if you're wanting those things based on you thinking those things are going to make you feel a certain way, well, then we know that's not lasting, right? And so, yeah, again, I started going down this journey of asking myself these questions. And as I start to do this, of course, my life didn't change right away. Like, I was still plugging away at work. I was still, busting my ass to perform and all these things. But as I got more curious about my life versus needing to control my life, that's when things really started to shift and evolve. And that's one thing I always tell people now. It's like, even when we feel anxiety, that's something that comes up. And I think our go-to is to try and get rid of that feeling, right? It's so uncomfortable. For me, it creeps up in my chest and then it goes into my stomach. And I'm like, I just need to get away from this feeling. Like, how do I get rid of it? How do I get rid of it? And of course, I typically tend to having more fight or flight responses, which means I try to solve the problem right now or do something to get me out of the situation right now so that I don't have to sit with this discomfort. And when I was doing that, what was happening was I actually wasn't connecting with myself within. So I didn't even know where to take myself next. Like, I was lost. So many of us approach our life from the place of feeling like we need to be in control. And because we think that the only way we can get anything out of life is by controlling it. Okay. And that's a survival technique. So we play out this cause and effect, kind of dance of like, I need to do this in order for this to happen. And I need to do this and I need to do that. And, the ego and the subconscious is so uncomfortable in uncertainty, which, if we're being honest, all of life is uncertain. Like, we can never predict anything. It doesn't matter. You could be with someone for 20 years and they might pass. You could have been with a company for 10 years and they decide to let you go. Like, there's zero certainty in our life. So, but yet we always want to try and control it. And when you think about it, it's just goes against the laws of nature. It goes against the laws of the universe. Like, how do we control something that we know is not controllable? Like, it's just wild when you think of that concept. But you can address it in this moment and you're going to keep doing it until we reframe our mind. But that's just because it's tens of years of conditioning, decades of conditioning. However, when I started to have more curiosity about my life versus controlling it, this is when it created space to see things differently, to do things differently, to try different approaches. And so, one of the ways I was able to start having curiosity about my life is, I mentioned mindfulness, which was great, but also learning to work with my nervous system. And I've done a lot of different modalities. I am a Reiki practitioner, so an energy healing practitioner. I read Akashic records. I have done sound healing. I've done all the things, meditation, all the things. And if I can give you one thing, I think that is the most beneficial tool for you to have as a human being is to learn how to regulate your nervous system. Okay? Because essentially what the nervous system does is its sole purpose is to keep us alive. And the way it determines how to keep us alive is by constantly scanning our environment throughout the day to determine what is safe and what is not. Okay. Now, the problem is if you don't know when your nervous system is in survival mode, you think that's just you. That's just the way you need to do things. And so again, I alluded to the fact that I was in fight or flight 90% of my life. I felt like there was always something after me, for lack of a better term. Like if we think about being in fight or flight, you might think of like a bear chasing you. Like I felt like there was always something coming to get me. And that's survival mode when you think about it. Like again, and if we go back to what my childhood was, my parents were escaping. They escaped another country to come here. Then they came here with nothing, no clothes on, just the clothes on their back. Then they had to create a living and raise kids, and they had more kids, and then they had to, it was constant like survival, like we have to make things happen. And then that energy carries through my childhood into my adulthood, and now I'm in an industry, my old career, where it's like eat what you kill. So again, constant like chasing the next target. And so like I was in fight or flight all day long. That was just my mode of surviving. But when I learned that the nervous system could be reprogrammed and could be taught how to come out of survival and into a balanced and regulated state, when I learned how to do that, now what I was doing is I was giving myself the space to take a breath and be present in the moment and be like, oh, there is no bear chasing me. Oh, I don't have anyone trying to take my spot. Oh, I am safe where I'm at. And, it was allowing my body these moments of reprieve. And by doing that, I was giving my field, my energy, my body a moment to just be free and be balanced, or I could look at things from a curious space. I didn't have to look at them from a place where like I need to control this. And that's when everything started to shift. Everything. I was able to like see myself from a different lens and see the world from a different lens. And, they say that you're not a victim of circumstance, you're a victim of perspective. And doing that work proved that to me. Like, again, from the outside in, everyone be like, Mintu's in survival mode. What are you talking about? Look at how great her life is. Why does she feel like she needs to survive? Like from someone removed from the situation, they could so clearly see that. But for me, it felt the opposite. It felt like every day I was just trying to get by. And that's really crazy when you think about it, because it's all a perceived threat. It was never real. Because again, everyone from the outside could see that. Like there's Mintu, chill out. Like why are you putting yourself through this? There's, your people are good, your family's good, your job's good. Like why are you putting yourself through this suffering? So it was a perceived threat. And that's the thing with the nervous system. The nervous system doesn't know the difference between real and perceived. It just knows the concepts and the images that you're replaying to it up here. It's all up here. And so like Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about the fact that, for instance, if you get in a car accident and you retell that story of the car accident 4 times this week, every time you retell that story, your body thinks you're going through that car accident again. So you could only imagine how hard it would be for your body and your mind to heal from that trauma when you're reliving it and putting it through the same cycle energetically 4 times a week. Like, that's what our nervous system is basing your energy reserves on. And so until I learned to give myself those moments of reprieve by balancing my nervous system, there's no way I could recover. There's no way I could be able to expand beyond what I had. And again, while I had was great, what I did know was that it was not sustainable at the rate I was at. Because I would wake up being like, is this it? Like, is this all there is to life? And again, that I felt guilty asking that because it would look selfish to other people because of the things I had. But for me to feel that within, is this it? Like, is because I didn't feel whole. I didn't feel peace. I didn't feel loved. I wasn't present. I was irritable. I was exhausted when I got home from work. I didn't have time for the things I love because I was so drained from my day of proving myself. Like, the things I love got no attention. The things that nourished me and replenished me and fed my soul got no attention because I spent the majority of my days trying to prove myself to the external world. Like, wow. But you don't know what you don't know. If you're not aware of what you're doing and what you're going through and the prison you've kind of put yourself in by believing these things, how do you expect yourself to climb out of it? You don't even know it exists, you know? And so again, 6, 7 years into my career, I started to awaken to this stuff. And then I just kept going and I started realizing the constraints of my mind and the limiting beliefs and honestly, to me, what it always comes back to is freedom. And I think sometimes we don't really understand what freedom is, but freedom is just being able to be at peace with the present moment and not feeling like it needs to be any other way. You know, when I ask my clients, I ask them when we start working together, like, what's your desired state? What's the dream life look to you? And lots of them will say, like, I want to have my businesses in a place where I don't need to be there all the time and I can travel the world and they're still making me income. Or, I want to know that, I can move out to an acreage and not have to be in town. I can, whatever. The picture is different for everybody. But what it always comes back to once we paint the picture, I go, but what are you optimizing for in that painting you just gave me? Like, what is that going to make you feel? And it always comes back to freedom. They just want to feel free. And so for myself, for the people I work with, we're always optimizing for more freedom and more love. And I think at the end of the day, that's what every human wants. We all want to be loved. We all want to belong, and we all just want to feel free. But the parameters under which we feel free come from within. We're so stuck always worrying about what the outside world dictates is our freedom. You know what I mean? And you can go into the political agendas, you can go into the governments and in the medical system and the school system and all these things. But until you're free within, those things will always feel like they're so limiting to you, right? And I believe the way that we free ourselves is that we get to a place again where we can feel peace in the moment and not wish that it be any other way. Because again, life is uncertain and there will inevitably be ups and downs and challenges. But how do we find peace in that moment? Because when we can truly do that, that's when we set ourselves free. And so that has been my life's work now. I eventually left my last career and I've started my, coaching business, which is higher alignment. And that's what I do with people. I lead them down a journey of finding more freedom in their lives and opening their eyes up to the limiting constraints that they've been living under to no fault of their own, because these are survival strategies, again, we've adopted as kids, but opening to their eyes to the fact that those survival strategies, we can be grateful for them because they got us to this point. But what's gotten us to this point doesn't necessarily work for the next chapter. And so, how can we open ourselves up? How can we connect back with ourselves to figure out what's really going to allow us to flourish and to blossom in this next chapter of life? And that's become my mission. I want to help people suffer less because I think we all suffer up here. You know, that's where the majority of our suffering exists. And by sharing my story, I hope that I can inspire people and show people that there's light at the end of the tunnel, that they don't need to be living in the same constraints that they have been. And that doesn't mean you have to change your life completely. Like you might want to change your job, but you might not have to. You might want to choose a new relationship, but you might not have to do that either. You might want to move, but you might not have to do that either. Because I think if you decide to change anything in your external world, it has to come from a place of knowing that you've already found that frequency within you. Because if you're hoping that by moving to another country, that's going to fix the lack you feel within, I'm sorry to say, once you move, it might be a temporary fix, but that will show up again because you actually haven't gotten to the root of the cause, which is what's within you. Again, the root cause of burnout is disconnect within. So you might change your relationship. If you haven't done the work, the pattern will show up again. You might want to quit your job and start where else. If you haven't done the work, the pattern will show up again, right? So when I work with people, I show them that they can free themselves without really having to change anything externally. They can free themselves just by working within. And once they do that, the rest of their world starts to shift. Okay. I'll be honest, the life I live now, the amount of freedom I have now, the version of Mintu 2 years ago wouldn't have been able to handle it. That version would have had a meltdown. Because she was so based in control. And I was already well into the work at that time, but I was still in a very controlling space. And control and freedom can't coexist. If we really understand what freedom is, we know that's a very hands open approach. Where control is where you're still grasping, you're still white knuckled, you're holding on to things so dearly because you feel like you need to mold them, shift them, just be in control. But what I help people realize is that when you can release that control, now you can open up your hands to receive. And these are when things really, really start to shift. So I hope people can learn from my journey and take it for the fact that you're still going to have to bump your head along the way. Okay. It's inevitable because your journey is different from my journey. But I hope that you can at least take from my story and the things I've learned and use that information to make your path a little bit more efficient. And not that it's just about efficiency, but just make your path a little bit smoother for you, get you there a little bit quicker. I always say that as humans, what we're most ashamed of typically is the parts of us that connect us the things that make us the most human and make us feel seen and heard. And so I tell all my stories, I tell my truth, I tell my um my path of not feeling enough from a place of just hoping that it will inspire you to realize that you don't have to be stuck in whatever constraints you're currently living in. And whether you want to be a great executive, a multi-million dollar business owner, a mother, a husband, a wife, whatever you want to achieve at, whatever you want to excel at in this life, you can do that by following this journey of coming into higher alignment. And again, I don't think it's a matter of us necessarily having to do more. I think the first step is just letting go of the weights that are keeping us stuck where we're currently at. And so I hope me sharing this with you today has resonated a little bit. I hope that you'll continue to stay along this journey with me. I hope I get to interact with you. And I hope that if anything, again, you get from this that it doesn't need, life doesn't need to feel like we're suffering every day. Life doesn't need to feel like we're in constant dread or anxiety. Life is meant to feel present and peaceful and purposeful. And it's not to say that we're still going to have moments of getting activated and getting anxious here and there, because that's how we know we're alive and that's how we know we're growing. But it doesn't need to be this confined space that we feel like we need to always escape. So, again, I hope you'll continue this journey with me. Thank you so much for listening. And as we go along this podcast, not only am I going to share my opinions and what I've learned along the way, I've done a lot of work in this space, but I'm also going to have other people come on and talk with me, other industry experts. And industry experts, what does that mean? Humans who've grown, like humans who I really respect, who I think are self-masters. It all comes back to self-mastery for me, and people who I respect the journey they've taken. And I have respect for all humans, but people who really have taken this self-mastery to another level, I'm going to be talking with them. I'm going to be helping them share their stories in hopes that it helps you. And again, I just hope that you'll stay along the journey with me. And I promise that if you continue to do this, you will free yourself. And that is my wish for everybody, is to find a place of freedom, find a place of more love, and essentially come into higher alignment. Okay, guys, see you in the next episode. Mwah!